Dr. Kesh Valderan had dedicated her entire career to proving that the universe made sense. 3 centuries of meticulous excavation across 47 worlds had taught her that civilizations rose, fell, and left behind predictable debris patterns. Pottery shards led to settlements. Settlements led to cities. Cities led to either transcendence or nuclear ash. Simple. Logical. Comfortingly linear. Which was why the cemetery on Kepler 442c made her want to throw her sonic trowel into the nearest black hole. Area. Run another chronometric scan on grave marker 47, she muttered, crouching beside a headstone that shouldn't exist. Her AI assistant, housed in the bulky excavation suit's shoulder module, hummed with electronic disapproval. Dr. Valderan, I've run this scan 17 times. The results remain consistent and impossible. Define impossible. The grave markers test at 12,847 years old. The engravings are in archaic Terran standard. The bodies beneath show human bone structure. However, according to all galactic records, humans achieved spaceflight only 2,431 years ago, and first left their solar system 1,892 years ago. Kesh's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Xanthari stress response that would have been embarrassing if anyone else were watching. Unfortunately, someone else was watching. Her research partner, Dr. Morvac of the Third Spiral, had been documenting her increasing agitation for the past 6 hours. Perhaps, Morvac suggested in his maddeningly calm baritone, we should consider contamination, some temporal disturbance or— There is no contamination, Kesh snapped, her tail lashing behind her. I've been excavating sites since before your species invented fire. These graves are authentic, properly stratified, and completely impossible. She stood up, brushing lunar dust from her suit, and gestured at the neat rows of markers stretching towards the horizon. Each headstone bore human names, human dates, human military designations. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, Lieutenant Commander David Kim, Private First Class Jennifer Walsh. On and on, hundreds of them, all allegedly dying in something called Operation Temporal Anchor in the year 2387, which, according to human records, was still 156 years in their future. The Galactic Archaeological Council will never accept this, Morvac said, photographing another impossible marker. Then we don't tell them. Kesh, we don't tell them until we understand what we're looking at. What they were looking at, according to Area's increasingly frazzled analysis algorithms, was evidence that either human civilization was far older and more advanced than anyone realized, or the fundamental laws of causality had developed a wicked sense of humor. Dr. Valderan, Aria interrupted. Incoming transmission from the GAC. Priority Alpha. Kesh sighed. Too late for secrets, apparently. Put it through. The holographic form of Director Quellen materialized above her wrist display, all 5 of his eye stalks twitching with bureaucratic irritation. Dr. Valderan, your preliminary reports are concerning. The Council has reviewed your data and found significant inconsistencies. What kind of inconsistencies? The kind that suggest either equipment failure or deliberate falsification. Human graves predating human spaceflight by 10 millennia? Come now, Doctor. We expect better from someone of your reputation. Kesh felt her academic credibility evaporating in real time. Director, I assure you the data is accurate. We've triple-checked everything. The stratification layers, the carbon dating, the Council has voted. You will suspend excavation immediately and submit all findings for peer review. We're also sending an independent verification team. What kind of verification team? A human one. The transmission cut out, leaving Kesh staring at her reflection in the blank display. a human verification team. Because obviously, if anyone could explain impossible human graves, it would be the humans themselves. "This is either going to solve everything," she muttered, "or make it infinitely worse." Morvac's species didn't have eyebrows, but his facial ridges managed to convey skepticism anyway. "You think the humans will have answers?" "I think the humans will have excuses. In my experience, when faced with paradoxes, most species either deny them or create elaborate philosophical frameworks to explain them away. Humans ... She paused, considering. Humans tend to shrug and say, "Yeah, that sounds about right." 3 days later, the human ship arrived. Kesh had expected a typical archaeological vessel, some converted cargo hauler with academic modifications and enough sensor equipment to scan a dust mote from orbit. Instead, she watched a sleek, almost military-looking craft settle onto the lunar surface with the kind of precision that suggested either very good pilots or very good autopilot systems. The airlock cycled, and 2 figures emerged. The first was clearly human. Average height, brown skin, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, wearing the kind of environmental suit that cost more than Kesh's annual research budget. The second figure looked human, but moved with mechanical precision that screamed artificial intelligence. "Dr. Valderin?" The human woman's voice carried the slight accent of someone who'd grown up speaking multiple languages. "I'm Dr. Elena Vasquez, Xenoarchaeology Division. This is Marcus." She gestured to her companion, who nodded politely. "A pleasure, Dr. Valderin," Marcus said. His voice was perfectly human except for a subtle harmonic undertone that made Kesh's teeth itch. "I've reviewed your preliminary data. Fascinating stuff." Elena was already walking toward the grave markers, pulling out scanning equipment that looked significantly more advanced than anything Kesh owned. "So, impossible human cemetery on a moon we've never officially visited. How impossible are we talking?" 12,000 years impossible, Kesh replied, hurrying to keep up. "Your species shouldn't have been capable of interstellar travel when these graves were dug." Elena knelt beside one of the markers, running her scanner over the engraved surface. "That's making some assumptions about capability versus recorded history, don't you think?" "I'm sorry?" "Well, just because we don't have records of something doesn't mean it didn't happen. History's full of gaps." Elena's scanner beeped, and she frowned at the readout. "Marcus, are you getting the same temporal displacement signatures I am?" "Confirmed. Approximately 10,000 years of chronoton drift, but the quantum signature suggests..." Marcus paused, as if consulting some internal database. "Retrocausal imprinting." Kesh felt her stress blinks starting again. "I'm sorry, retrocausal what?" Elena stood up, dusting off her knees with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. "Oh, you know, effect preceding cause, temporal echoes, probability shadows cast backward through time." She moved to the next grave, scanner still running. "Pretty standard stuff once you get into advanced causality mechanics." "Pretty standard?" Morvac had been silent until now, but his voice climbed several octaves. "Dr. Vasquez, are you seriously suggesting that these graves were created by some kind of time travel?" "Time travel?" Elena laughed, and it wasn't entirely reassuring. "Oh no, that would be ridiculous. Time travel implies going backward to change something. This is more like..." She gestured vaguely at the cemetery. "Archaeological seeding." "Which means what, exactly?" Kesh demanded. Elena's smile was perfectly friendly and absolutely terrifying. "It means, Dr. Valderin, that we've been here before, in a sense." The wind across the lunar surface carried no sound, but somehow the silence felt heavy with implications that Kesh was fairly certain she didn't want to understand. "Dr. Vasquez," she said carefully, "how exactly does one seed archaeology?" "Same way you seed anything else," Elena replied, already moving toward the next row of graves. "You plant it where you want it to grow." Behind them, Marcus made a sound that might have been electronic laughter. "This," Kesh muttered to Morvac, "is definitely going to make everything infinitely worse." The emergency session of the Tri-Species Archaeological Tribunal convened in the sterile white conference chamber aboard the neutral station Nexus Prime. Kesh had never seen 3 civilizations move so fast to organize a formal inquiry, which told her exactly how much her little discovery had rattled the galactic academic establishment. Ambassador Thyril of the Zenthari delegation sat with her ceremonial robes arranged in patterns that conveyed deep unease. Across from her, the Kithara representative, a crystalline being whose name translated roughly to "sharp thought cutting through deception," maintained the diamond-hard silence his people used when they suspected someone was lying to them. The Molthek observer, a writhing mass of tentacles and attitude, had positioned himself at the head of the table in a configuration that Kesh recognized as preparing to strangle something. Elena sat in the defendant's chair with the relaxed posture of someone attending a mildly interesting lecture. "Dr. Vasquez," Ambassador Thyril began, her voice carrying 3 centuries of diplomatic training. "We have reviewed the evidence from Kepler 442c. The implications are troubling." "Troubling how?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. Sharp Thought's crystalline form chimed with harmonic frequencies that conveyed barely controlled frustration. "You claim these graves belong to human soldiers who died in a war that has not yet occurred." "I didn't claim anything. I said the chronoton signatures suggested retrocausal imprinting. You're the ones drawing conclusions." The Molthek, whose actual name was unpronounceable but who went by Administrator Vexus in Galactic Standard, rippled his tentacles in a pattern that translated as maximum skepticism. "Dr. Vasquez, perhaps you could enlighten us about these temporal echoes you mentioned so casually." Elena leaned back in her chair and crossed her arms. "Well, it's like this. Imagine you're standing in a canyon and you shout. The echo comes back to you later, right? But what if the canyon existed in 4 dimensions instead of 3? What if the echo could bounce back not just through space, but through time?" "That," Sharp Thought chimed coldly, "is not how causality works." "Isn't it, according to whose physics?" Kesh watched the exchange with growing dread. Elena wasn't just deflecting their questions. She was challenging fundamental assumptions about how reality operated. The worst part was that she seemed to be enjoying herself. "Dr. Vasquez," Ambassador Thyril interjected, "surely you understand our concern. If humans possess some form of temporal manipulation technology..." "Who said anything about technology?" The silence that followed was the kind usually reserved for moments when someone accidentally insults a deity. "I beg your pardon?" Vexus's tentacles had gone completely still, which in Molthek body language meant either deep contemplation or preparation for immediate violence. "Look," Elena said, spreading her hands in a gesture of apparent reasonableness. "You're all thinking about this wrong. You see impossible graves and assume impossible technology. But what if it's not about technology at all? What if it's about perspective?" "Explain," Sharp Thought demanded. Elena stood up and walked to the chamber's observation window, gazing out at the swirling nebula beyond. "Your species experience time linearly, past, present, future, all in a nice, neat line. Very logical, very predictable. But humans?" She turned back to face the tribunal. "Humans have this annoying habit of existing in multiple temporal states simultaneously." "That's impossible," Vexus stated flatly. "Is it?" How many of your species dream about the future? None, all three representatives answered in unison. How many experience déjà vu? That's a neurological malfunction, Sharp Thought chimed dismissively. How many of you ever feel like you've lived through something before, or know what's going to happen next, or remember events that haven't occurred yet? The aliens exchanged glances that managed to convey both confusion and growing alarm. None, Ambassador Thyrell said slowly. Those are considered signs of mental instability. Elena nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. Right. See, that's the difference. For humans, those aren't bugs in the system. They're features. We exist partially outside linear time whether we realize it or not. Most of us ignore it, explain it away, pretend it doesn't happen. But some of us— She smiled, that terrifying, friendly smile again. Some of us learn to use it. Use it how? Kesh heard herself asking. Probability archaeology. We don't change the past. That would be rude and probably catastrophic. Instead, we identify probability streams where events we need to have happened actually happened. Then we collapse the wave function to make those streams real. Vexus's tentacles were now moving in rapid patterns that Kesh's translator struggled to interpret. Something about metaphysical nonsense and impossible quantum mechanics. Dr. Vasquez, Ambassador Thyrell said with forced calm, you're describing a form of reality manipulation that violates several fundamental laws of physics. According to physics that assume consciousness is separate from quantum mechanics, humans never made that assumption. Sharp Thought's harmonic frequencies climbed to nearly ultrasonic levels. Are you claiming that human consciousness can directly manipulate quantum probability? I'm not claiming anything. I'm just explaining why you found a cemetery full of soldiers who died fighting a war that technically hasn't started yet. Elena returned to her chair with the air of someone who'd just explained something perfectly obvious. They're not from the future, and we didn't send them into the past. They exist in the probability space where the war happened, and human consciousness keeps that space stable enough to leave physical evidence. The three representatives of galactic civilization stared at her in the kind of horrified silence usually reserved for natural disasters or tax audits. You're saying, Kesh said carefully, that humans can make events real just by believing in them strongly enough? Not exactly. We can make events that could have been real actually be real. There's a difference. What difference? Vexus demanded. Elena's expression grew thoughtful. Well, the soldiers in those graves didn't die in our timeline. They died in a probability where the war they were fighting actually happened. But human consciousness is weird. We can anchor probability, streams that serve our purposes, and let them become retroactively true. That's— Sharp Thought began, then stopped, his harmonic patterns cycling through several configurations before settling on one that roughly translated as deeply concerned confusion. Insane? Elena suggested helpfully. I was going to say revolutionary. Ambassador Thyrell leaned forward, her diplomatic composure finally cracking. Dr. Vasquez, if what you're describing is accurate, then humans possess capabilities that fundamentally alter our understanding of consciousness, quantum mechanics, and temporal causality. Oh, we do, Elena agreed cheerfully. We just don't usually mention it. Tends to make people nervous. The understatement of the millennium, Kesh thought. The three most powerful civilizations in the galaxy had just learned that their newest member species could apparently rewrite history by thinking about it hard enough. Dr. Vasquez, Vexus said, his tentacles now arranged in what Kesh recognized as a formal threat display. We demand proof of these claims. Elena's smile widened. Funny you should ask. I was hoping someone would say that. She stood up and walked toward the chamber's exit. Follow me to the cemetery. I'll introduce you to some of the soldiers personally. The silence that followed was the kind that precedes either enlightenment or apocalypse. "They're not actually dead, are they?" Kesh asked faintly. "Dead is such a limiting concept," Elena replied. And Kesh realized that everything she thought she understood about reality was about to become significantly more complicated. Back on Kepler 442c, the lunar surface felt different. Not physically. The gravity remained exactly 1/6 standard. The atmosphere still consisted of vacuum and regret. But something in the air had shifted. Or perhaps something in the probability matrices, assuming those were actually real things and not elaborate human delusions. Kesh stood between Ambassador Thyril and Sharp Thought, watching Elena approach grave marker 127 with the casual confidence of someone who'd never encountered an impossibility she couldn't explain away. Marcus flanked them all, his sensors apparently detecting something the rest of them couldn't perceive. "Increased quantum flux," he announced to no one in particular. "Probability cascade beginning in 3, 2, 1. Elena placed her palm against the headstone, marked, "Sergeant Carlos Torres, died serving tomorrow." The air above the grave shimmered like heat distortion, except heat distortion didn't usually result in armed soldiers materializing from thin air. Sergeant Torres appeared gradually, first as a translucent outline, then gaining substance until he stood solid and undeniably present on the lunar surface. He wore environmental armor that made Elena's expensive suit look like canvas work clothes, carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy, and regarded the assembled group with the weary professionalism of someone who'd been dealing with temporal displacement for far too long. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, his voice carrying clearly through their comm systems. "About damn time. Do you have any idea how boring it is being quantum-locked for 72 hours? "Sorry about that, Carlos. Had to wait for the right probability alignment. You know how it is." "Yeah, I know how it is." Torres looked around at the alien representatives, all of whom were exhibiting their species' equivalent of catatonic shock. "These the ones who wanted proof?" "That's them. Say hello to the nice archaeologists, Sergeant." Torres snapped a crisp salute that somehow managed to convey both military discipline and profound irritation. "Sergeant Carlos Torres, 3rd Temporal Infantry Division, reporting for demonstration duty, ma'am." Vexus's tentacles had formed themselves into a configuration that Kesh had never seen before, but which her translator was desperately trying to render as existential horror with undertones of bureaucratic anxiety. "This is impossible," Sharp Thought chimed, his harmonic frequencies crackling with static. "You cannot simply manifest deceased individuals from quantum probability." "Well, technically, he's not deceased," Elena pointed out. "He's temporally displaced. There's a difference." Torres nodded agreement. "I died in 2387 defending Station Prometheus from the Void Collective. But that was in a probability stream where humans developed faster than light travel earlier and ran into some very unfriendly neighbors. Since that timeline got collapsed when we discovered quantum consciousness manipulation, my death became provisional." "Provisional death," Ambassador Thyril repeated faintly. "It's not that complicated," Torres said. "Think of it like being on indefinite leave. Except instead of leave from active duty, it's leave from being dead." More graves began to shimmer. One by one, additional soldiers materialized, some in armor similar to Torres's, others wearing gear that looked like it belonged to entirely different technological paradigms. A woman in what appeared to be powered exoskeleton armor. A man carrying weapons that seemed to bend light around themselves. A teenager who couldn't have been older than 18, but whose eyes held the flat certainty of someone who'd seen civilizations rise and fall. "Squad's all here," Torres announced. "Permission to resume temporal displacement, Doc?" "Not yet," Elena said. I think our guests have some questions. Kesh found her voice, though it came out as more of a croak. How many of you are there? In this cemetery? About 400, said the woman in exoskeleton armor. I'm Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, by the way. Died in 2403 when the hegemony tried to crack Earth's quantum shields. Didn't work out well for them. Or us, added the teenager. Private Williams. Died in 2298 during the First Probability War. That was back when we were still figuring out how consciousness quantum interaction worked. Made a lot of mistakes. Probability War? Vexus managed to ask through his tentacle paralysis. Oh, that was a mess, Williams said cheerfully. We discovered that 3 other species in the local cluster could also manipulate quantum consciousness, and we all started trying to make mutually exclusive timelines real simultaneously. Reality got confused for about 40 years. How did it end? Sharp Thought demanded. We won, Torres said simply. Turns out humans are really good at making impossible things seem reasonable. The other species kept trying to use logic and mathematics. We just believed harder. Elena cleared her throat. The demonstration's not quite over yet. She walked to another section of the cemetery and touched a different headstone. This time, what materialized wasn't a soldier, but a piece of equipment. A sleek, metallic sphere that hung in the air about 3 meters off the ground, pulsing with soft blue light. Temporal anchor drone, Elena explained. Standard equipment for probability archaeology. It maintains quantum coherence across multiple timeline branches. And it does what, exactly? Ambassador Thyril asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't sure she wanted to know. It ensures that the soldiers can exist in multiple probability states without causing paradoxes. Think of it as a quantum filing system. Keeps all the might-have-beens organized so they don't interfere with what is. Marcus stepped forward, his sensors focused on the floating sphere. Dr. Vasquez, this device is maintaining active quantum entanglement across at least 47 distinct probability matrices. The computational power required would exceed the combined processing capacity of every AI in the Galactic network. Would it? Elena asked mildly. Yes, unless ... Marcus paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a distinctly different harmonic pattern. Unless consciousness itself serves as the processing substrate. The implications of that statement hit the assembled aliens like a collapsing star. If human consciousness could process quantum probability calculations that exceeded their most advanced artificial intelligences, then humans weren't just another species with an unusual talent. They were something fundamentally different from anything else the galaxy had encountered. Dr. Vasquez, Vexus said, his tentacles now arranged in what could only be described as desperate supplication. Exactly how many humans can do what you're doing? Elena considered the question. Well, most humans have some degree of quantum consciousness interaction. They just don't realize it. But trained practitioners? Active probability archaeologists? She smiled. Let's just say we have enough to maintain several thousand cemeteries like this one. Several thousand? Kesh whispered. Scattered across about 800 star systems, yeah. We've been preparing for various potential conflicts for, about 12,000 years now. The silence stretched until Torres cleared his throat. Doc, not to interrupt the existential crisis, but can we get back to being quantum locked? Standing around in a probability matrix for too long makes my teeth itch. Of course, Sergeant. Thanks for the demonstration. One by one, the soldiers began to fade back into translucent outlines, then shimmers, then nothing at all. The temporal anchor drone pulsed once and vanished. Elena turned back to the alien representatives, who were staring at the empty graves with the expression of people who'd just watched their understanding of physics get fed into a wood chipper. So, she said brightly, Any other questions about the cemetery? In the resulting silence, Kesh could hear her own hearts beating and wondered if they were beating in the right timeline. The return journey to Nexus Prime passed in what could generously be called contemplative terror. 3 of the galaxy's most advanced civilizations had just witnessed their fundamental understanding of existence get casually dismantled by a human archaeologist and her collection of provisionally dead soldiers. Kesh sat in her quarters, staring at her notes and trying to process what she'd learned. Every archaeological principle she'd ever believed in, stratification, carbon dating, linear historical progression, had just been revealed as quaint local customs rather than universal laws. The emergency session that followed made the previous tribunal look like a casual academic discussion. "Status report," demanded Supreme Chancellor Kithik, whose crystalline form now pulsed with urgent amber frequencies that suggested barely controlled panic. Representatives from 17 different civilizations had assembled virtually, their holographic forms creating a constellation of alien anxiety around the conference chamber. Ambassador Thyril activated her presentation matrix, and 3-dimensional images of the cemetery filled the space between them. "The situation is worse than we initially assessed. Dr. Vasquez has revealed that humans maintain what they call archaeological weapons across 800 star systems." "Define archaeological weapons," requested High Arbiter Zeln of the Mokari hegemony. "Military installations that exist retroactively in the past, present, and future simultaneously," Sharp Thought answered, his harmonic patterns cycling through configurations that approximated nausea. "Soldiers who died in wars that may or may not happen, but whose deaths serve strategic purposes regardless of their reality status." Vexus unfurled his tentacles in a display pattern that roughly translated as universe-breaking revelation. The implications extend beyond military applications. If humans can anchor probability matrices to create retroactive evidence, then every historical artifact we've attributed to their civilization could be artificially seeded. "Meaning what, exactly?" Chancellor Kithek demanded. "Meaning," a new voice interrupted, "that you're finally asking the right questions." Elena materialized in the center of the conference chamber, not as a hologram, but physically present, which should have been impossible given that she was supposedly still on Kepler 442c. Marcus appeared beside her, his optical sensors scanning the assembled representatives with what looked suspiciously like amusement. "Dr. Vasquez," Ambassador Thyril said, her diplomatic training warring with several conflicting emotional responses. "How did you—" "Quantum translation. Basic probability manipulation. We've been using it for diplomatic meetings for about 6,000 years now." Elena looked around the chamber with the expression of someone conducting a particularly interesting experiment. Though this is the first time we've had to explain it to anyone. Supreme Chancellor Kithek's crystalline structure shifted to deep violet, a color that in Kithera psychology indicated either profound respect or preparation for immediate warfare. "Dr. Vasquez, the Galactic community requires clarification about the true extent of human capabilities." "Fair enough." Elena gestured, and suddenly the chamber's holographic displays activated, showing star charts that none of them had authorized. "Marcus, show them the archaeological distribution network." The star charts zoomed out, revealing patterns of light scattered across the galaxy like luminous spiderwebs. Each point of light represented one of the human cemeteries, temporal anchor points that existed across multiple probability matrices. "Every human artifact your civilizations have ever discovered," Elena explained conversationally, "was placed by probability archaeologists working backward from potential futures. That pottery shard on Vega 7 that convinced you humans were early traders? Planted in 2156 by a team preparing for economic integration scenarios. The crashed ship on Rigel that suggested human exploration began earlier than recorded? Future salvage operation anchored retroactively to establish territorial claims. The silence that followed was profound enough to have its own gravitational field. High Arbiter Zeln spoke first, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone trying not to provoke something vastly more powerful than herself. You're saying that human civilization as we understand it is entirely constructed? Not constructed, optimized. Elena's smile held depths that made Kesha's archaeological training scream warnings about unstable excavation sites. Humans discovered probability archaeology about 14,000 years ago, before we'd even achieved nuclear fusion. We've been using it to ensure our civilization develops along optimal pathways ever since. Optimal for what purpose? Demanded Chancellor Kithek. Survival, integration, peaceful coexistence. Elena paused. And preparing for threats you don't know about yet. Marcus stepped forward, his optical arrays focusing on something beyond the chamber walls. Dr. Vasquez, shall I show them the convergence event projections? Might as well. They've come this far. The holographic displays shifted, showing probability cascades that stretched thousands of years into the future. Complex mathematical structures formed and dissolved, representing potential timelines branching and reconverging across vast spans of causality. In approximately 400 years, Elena explained, your local galactic cluster will encounter what we call a convergence event. Multiple hostile civilizations from outside this galaxy will arrive simultaneously through different forms of faster-than-light travel. Based on current probability assessments, the combined technological and military capabilities of all known species in this galaxy have a 12.7% chance of survival. The assembled representatives absorbed this information with the kind of stunned silence usually associated with planetary disasters. However, Elena continued, probability archaeology allows us to prepare retroactively. Every temporal anchor point, every archaeological weapon, every human artifact you've discovered. They're all part of a defensive network that spans 14 millennia and ensures that when the convergence event occurs, your civilizations will have the support infrastructure necessary for survival. You've been protecting us? Ambassador Thyril asked faintly. We've been preparing to protect everyone, including ourselves. Humans learned early that the universe is full of things that want to eat consciousness-based life forms. Probabilistic defense networks seemed like a reasonable response. Vexus's tentacles had arranged themselves into patterns that Kesha's translator rendered as existential awe mixed with mild indignation. Dr. Vasquez, why are you revealing this information now? Elena looked directly at Kesh, and for a moment her expression softened into something almost human. Because Dr. Valderan here stumbled onto one of our anchor points and asked the right questions. Because your civilizations are advanced enough to understand the explanations. And because... She shrugged. The convergence event timeline just accelerated. You've got about 200 years instead of 400. The implications hit the chamber like a wave of existential vertigo. What do you need from us? Supreme Chancellor Kithek asked, his violet crystalline structure now pulsing with urgent determination. Nothing you're not already doing. Continue developing your technologies, expanding your knowledge, building your civilizations. The probability matrices are already in place to ensure everything develops optimally. Elena began to fade around the edges, quantum translation apparently working in reverse. Just when you start finding more impossible archaeological evidence over the next few centuries, try not to dismiss it as contamination. Dr. Vasquez, Kesh called out as Elena's form grew increasingly translucent. Are you really an archaeologist? Elena's laugh echoed strangely as she faded from view. Doctor, Valderin, I've been digging up the future and burying it in the past for over 300 years. What else would you call me?" She vanished completely, leaving behind only the lingering scent of temporal displacement and the uncomfortable knowledge that every grave Kesh had ever excavated might have been placed there by someone who knew exactly what she would find. Marcus remained solid for a few moments longer. "A pleasure meeting you all," he said politely. "When you're ready to fight wars across time itself, give us a call. We'll be waiting in your past." He disappeared as well, leaving 17 civilizations to contemplate the fact that their newest galactic neighbors had been quietly managing their historical development for 14,000 years. In the resulting silence, Kesh reflected that she'd started this excavation hoping to prove the universe made sense. Mission accomplished, she supposed. It made sense, just not in any way she'd ever imagined possible.